hard way on a sunny Saturday morning, when I drove back from town with groceries only to see a line of parked cars stretching along the road by my cabin. SUVs, sedans, even a minivan with balloons tied to the mirror. It looked less like a quiet lakefront lane and more like a used car lot preparing for a festival. As I turned the bend, the sight that greeted me nearly made me drop my grocery bag. Karen, dressed in a floral dress far too cheerful for her sour mood, had set up folding tables near the edge of the road with cookies and lemonade, while the Realtor, yes, the same one still clinging to his fragile reputation, paced nervously by a sign that read, "Open House Today. Don't miss out." And there behind them, people I'd never seen before were milling around, cameras out, pointing toward my cabin as though it were some prize exhibit. My padlock was still firmly in place, my sign glaring as boldly as ever, but that didn't stop Karen from treating the area like it was hers to auction. I pulled up, rolled down the window, and said loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "Funny thing about open houses. Usually the owner is the one who opens the door." Heads turned, whispers rippled, and the Realtor visibly paled, as if realizing yet again how deep in quicksand he stood. I parked, walked calmly past the lemonade table, and stopped at the gate where Karen was mid-speech about the potential investment value of this unique rustic gem. Her voice faltered as I unlocked my own cabin door in full view of the onlookers and waved. "Hi everyone," I called out cheerfully, "welcome to my property. Not for sale, but tours are free if you enjoy watching trespassers make fools of themselves." The laughter from a few in the crowd was instant, and the color drained from Karen's face. She tried to recover by shouting, "This man has been in violation of community law for months. We have the right to intervene." But the humor of the situation was too obvious, and the crowd wasn't buying it. One man asked bluntly, "Wait, so you're not selling?" And when I replied, "Nope, never listed it, never will," the Realtor crumbled. He stammered, sweat pooling at his collar, and muttered something about miscommunication. The buyers turned on him, voices rising, one woman demanding, "We drove 3 hours for this? Are you kidding me?" The cookies and lemonade went untouched as people began retreating to their cars, muttering angrily about scams. Karen, desperate to salvage control, grabbed one of the balloons from the minivan and tied it to the gatepost as though sheer decoration could override reality. I walked up, untied it calmly, and handed it back. "No decorations without the owner's permission," I said with a grin, twisting her own HOA logic into a knife. She sputtered, yanked the balloon from my hand, and stomped off in fury as the last car drove away, leaving her and the Realtor alone on the roadside, surrounded by crumbs of uneaten cookies and the sticky remains of melted lemonade cups. For a long moment the two of them just stood there, Karen with her arms crossed, the Realtor looking like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Then she shrieked something about sabotage, and stormed away, heels stabbing the dirt like tiny daggers, leaving him behind to gather up the folding tables with shaking hands. I thought perhaps that debacle would quiet them for a while, but Karen wasn't finished. The very next morning she came back with reinforcements, this time dragging half the board and a handful of loyalists. They unfurled another banner that said, "Future Development Site," and planted it crookedly on the grass outside my fence. I couldn't resist stepping out and reading it aloud with exaggerated drama. "Future Development Site," I said. "What's the plan, a theme park? Or maybe a Karen museum? Admission free if you bring a complaint form." Even some of her own allies chuckled before quickly covering their mouth. Karen hissed at them, then turned back to me with venom in her eyes. "You won't laugh when we take this to court," she snarled. I sipped my coffee and replied, "I'll laugh there too. I promise." But here was the twist that even I didn't see coming. I had filmed the entire open house fiasco the day before. Every balloon, every buyer walking away in disgust, every second of Karen's meltdown. And by evening, I had uploaded the video to a local community forum online where it spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had missed the show watched it in disbelief, then shared it with friends, and soon the comments were pouring in. "This is insanity," one wrote. "They can't get away with this." Another added, "I knew Karen was bad, but this is fraud." By the time the sun set, the HOA's credibility was shredded far beyond my cabin. People were digging up old grievances, sharing stories of fines for trivial nonsense, and suddenly it wasn't just me standing against them, it was half the neighborhood. The Realtor called me that night, his voice shaky, begging me to take the video down, claiming it was damaging to his reputation. I let him talk himself into a knot, then simply said, "You did that to yourself. My camera just told the truth." He groaned, muttered something about legal action, but we both knew he had no ground left to stand on. His career was hanging by a thread, and Karen had tied the knot herself. The fallout hit fast. The next HOA meeting was chaos, with residents shouting, demanding resignations, waving printouts of the video. Karen tried to spin it as manipulated footage, but nobody was buying it. Board members who once followed her lead sat in silence, refusing to back her up. Some even avoided eye contact altogether, their loyalty evaporating in the heat of public scorn. When one neighbor stood up and asked why the board was wasting dues money on ridiculous schemes instead of fixing the potholes in the road, the room erupted in applause. Karen's face tightened, her voice shook, and for the first time I saw not anger but fear in her eyes. Meanwhile, I kept my routine calm and simple. Coffee on the porch in the morning, padlock gleaming on the gate, signs standing proud. Every time Karen tried something new, it only backfired harder. Her future development site banner vanished overnight, taken down not by me but by angry neighbors who were tired of the embarrassment. Her threats of lawsuits fizzled when the county inspector's report leaked into the forum, confirming again that the HOA had no jurisdiction. And through it all, I just smiled, because nothing rattled them more than my calm refusal to flinch. Still, I knew they would try again. People like Karen don't just walk away. They cling to power with nails and teeth, even when the rope is slipping from their hands. But now, instead of standing alone, I had an army of witnesses. Every neighbor who had laughed at the open house, every comment online, every groan at the last meeting, they were all fuel for the truth. Karen had overplayed her hand, and now the whole board was paying the price. The tension that had been simmering through the neighborhood finally boiled over in Chapter 6 when the HOA decided that if public stunts and open houses weren't enough to intimidate me, they would take the matter to court, dragging the whole circus into a place where they believed their official-looking papers and loud voices might overwhelm common sense. I learned of it through a certified letter hand-delivered by a nervous teenager who clearly wanted no part of the feud but had been sent as a messenger. The envelope bore the mark of a local attorney, and inside was a formal complaint alleging that I had obstructed the HOA's ability to exercise authority over community assets and had engaged in defamation by posting the video of the fake open house. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee on the document, because the idea of them accusing me of defamation when I had filmed their own blunders was the kind of irony you couldn't buy. Still, I knew this was serious in its own way. A courtroom meant rules, records, and a judge who wouldn't tolerate shouting matches or lemonade stands. It meant that Karen's wild fantasy would finally collide head-on with reality in front of an audience that wouldn't humor her delusions. I tucked the letter into the growing file I kept of their nonsense, called the county inspector who had already promised his support, and began preparing for what I suspected would be the most entertaining day this town's courthouse had seen in years. The day of the hearing arrived with the kind of clear blue sky that feels too perfect for anything dramatic, yet as I walked up the courthouse steps with my folder of deeds, maps, and printed screenshots, I felt the weight of the moment. Inside, the courtroom was small, the kind with wooden benches polished by decades of restless shuffling, and already half full with neighbors who had shown up not because they were involved but because word had spread and nobody wanted to miss the show. On one side sat Karen and 3 board members, dressed in their stiffest clothes, their faces set with forced confidence. Beside them, the Realtor shifted uncomfortably in his suit, tugging at his collar like it was strangling him. On the other side, I sat calmly with my folder, nodding to a few neighbors who offered encouraging smiles. At the front of the room, the judge, a man with silver hair and tired eyes that suggested he had seen every kind of nonsense imaginable, banged his gavel and called the hearing to order. Karen's attorney launched first, delivering a long speech about community integrity, shared governance, and my supposed pattern of hostility toward authority. He waved papers in the air, citing bylaws and pointing toward me as though I were some kind of outlaw who had infiltrated their idyllic neighborhood. The words sounded impressive if you didn't think too hard, but the cracks showed quickly. When he claimed my cabin fell under HOA jurisdiction, I calmly slid a copy of the county map across to the judge. When he accused me of harassing the board with provocative signage, I produced a photo of my simple truth-telling sign and asked whether stating ownership was now considered harassment. Murmurs of laughter trickled through the benches, and the judge raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed with the theatrics. Then came Karen herself, called to testify. She marched to the stand like a queen taking her throne, pearls gleaming, chin lifted high, but within minutes her composure cracked. She tried to explain why she believed the HOA had the right to list my cabin for sale, but under questioning she admitted she had never seen my deed, had never consulted the county, and had relied entirely on community precedent, a phrase that sounded more like playground logic than law. The judge leaned forward, steepling his fingers, and asked slowly, "So you attempted to sell a property you had no legal claim to, based on nothing more than your assumption?" Karen sputtered, tried to twist her words, but the silence in the room pressed down until even she had to mutter a reluctant yes. The judge's sigh echoed through the chamber, and several neighbors stifled laughter. The Realtor was next, and his testimony only made things worse. He admitted he had taken the listing at Karen's insistence, had not verified ownership beyond her word, and had indeed hosted an open house where buyers showed up only to find the property locked and signed against sale. When pressed about the video, he winced and admitted it was accurate, that I had not misrepresented anything. His voice cracked under the weight of his own mistakes, and when the judge asked bluntly whether he was aware he could face disciplinary action with the Real Estate Commission, the man nearly wilted into the witness chair. By the time he stepped down, he looked 10 years older, his career dangling by a thread. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I explained that I owned the cabin outright, presented the certified deed, the county inspector's report, and copies of every letter the HOA had sent. I didn't embellish or rant. I let their own absurdity speak louder than anything I could invent. The judge flipped through the documents, nodded slowly, and finally leaned back with a look that was equal parts exhaustion and disbelief. "I have presided over many disputes," he said, "but rarely have I seen such a flagrant misuse of authority as this. The HOA has not only overstepped its jurisdiction but attempted to commit fraud by representing property it does not own. This case is dismissed with prejudice." He paused, glaring at Karen and her board. "Furthermore, I strongly suggest the HOA review its leadership practices before more serious consequences follow." The gavel banged, the sound sharp and final, and in that moment the tension that had gripped the community for months cracked wide open. The reaction was immediate. Neighbors on the benches burst into applause, some laughing outright, others shaking their heads at the absurdity that it had even reached this point. Karen sat frozen, her mouth tight, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. The board members beside her looked anywhere but at her, their loyalty evaporating under the heat of public humiliation. The Realtor slumped in his seat, his career unraveling in full view of everyone. And I, calm as ever, simply gathered my folder, thanked the judge, and walked out into the sunlight with a smile. But the fallout didn't end at the courthouse door. That evening, the community forum was ablaze with posts about the ruling, neighbors dissecting every detail, praising the judge's blunt words, and mocking Karen's meltdown. Screenshots of the ruling spread quickly, and by nightfall, there were whispers of a petition to remove Karen as HOA president. Some residents who had once stayed quiet were suddenly emboldened, sharing stories of ridiculous fines, arbitrary rules, and years of bullying by the board. What had been my personal battle was transforming into a community-wide uprising, and Karen's empire was crumbling from the inside out. In the days that followed the courtroom defeat, the neighborhood seemed to hum with a different kind of energy, as if the air itself had shifted, lighter for some and heavier for others, depending entirely on which side of the debacle you had been standing. For me, mornings on the porch felt freer, the weight of constant skirmishes replaced by the simple satisfaction of victory, though I never let myself believe the storm had passed entirely. Karen was too stubborn, too intoxicated by her sense of power to fade into obscurity without one last desperate act, and sure enough, she tried. It began with whispers of an appeal, her voice crackling through a late-night email blast in which she insisted the judge had been biased, that the county had been misled, and that I was a menace to the values of the community. The email was so overblown, so saturated with capital letters and exclamation marks, that it backfired almost instantly, spreading through the forum like a joke rather than a rallying cry. Neighbors mocked her spelling errors, laughed at her claims of bias, and posted memes of padlocks and chains with captions about the real authority around here. For once, the laughter wasn't just mine, it belonged to the entire neighborhood. But humiliation only made her double down. A few days later, I returned from a trip into town to find that someone had slapped a giant foreclosure notice sign on my gate in bright red paint. The paper was cheap, the wording sloppy, and the county seal was clearly photocopied, but it didn't matter. Karen's fingerprints were all over it. I pulled it down, laughed, and filmed myself burning it in the fire pit before uploading the clip with the caption, "Nice try, Karen. Better luck forging next time." Within hours, the video had gone viral locally, and even residents from neighboring communities chimed in with their own horror stories about overzealous HOAs. The tide had gone beyond my cabin. It had turned into a movement, and Karen's name was becoming synonymous with the worst kind of neighborhood tyranny. That was when the petitions began circulating formally, signatures piling up faster than she could delete dissenting comments from the HOA's official page. By the end of the week, more than half the neighborhood had signed in favor of removing her from the presidency. The climax came at what was supposed to be a routine HOA meeting but quickly became her downfall. I arrived early, not because I needed to, but because I wanted a good seat to watch the show. The room was packed, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with anticipation. Karen marched in late, head high, pearls gleaming, folder clutched like a lifeline. She launched into her usual tirade about community integrity and outside threats, but the crowd was no longer silent and pliant. Hands shot up, voices interrupted, and one by one residents stood to recount their grievances: fines for grass an inch too long, threats for parking in their own driveways, shaming emails for Christmas lights hung a day past the deadline. The stories poured out like floodwaters, each one chipping away at her defenses until her smile faltered, her voice cracked, and her pearls trembled against her throat. When the petition was finally read aloud and the vote taken, it wasn't even close. She was ousted in a landslide, her reign shattered not by my padlock alone but by the collective weight of years of resentment finally given a voice. The Realtor, perhaps sensing the chance to save what little reputation he had left, slunk in near the end to announce his resignation from all dealings with the HOA. He muttered apologies, promised to review his practices, and left quickly, face down, shoulders slumped. Nobody stopped him, nobody cared. His career had been torched by his own carelessness and Karen's manipulations, and now he was just another casualty of her obsession. The new interim president, a quiet man named Jenkins who had never raised his voice at a meeting before, stood awkwardly and promised reforms. More transparency, fewer petty fines, a focus on actual community needs instead of personal vendettas. The applause that followed was genuine, and for the first time in years, hope replaced tension in the room. As for Karen, she didn't go quietly. She stormed out mid-meeting, folder clutched to her chest, muttering about lawsuits and conspiracies, but the sound of laughter followed her out the door. Later, I saw her car speed past my cabin, gravel spraying behind her tires, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her, not because she didn't deserve the fall, but because she had built her identity entirely on control, and now she had none. She was a queen without a crown, a general without an army, left to shout at shadows. For me, the final act came a few days later when I replaced my old sign at the gate with a new one. The padlock still hung strong, the chain still gleamed in the sun, but the sign now read, "Private property, no trespassing, not for sale, ever." Beneath it, I added a smaller note in hand-painted letters, "Smile, you're on camera." Neighbors walking by stopped to laugh, some even snapping photos, and more than one gave me a thumbs up. It wasn't just a sign anymore. It was a symbol, a quiet declaration that no matter how much noise had been thrown at me, the truth had held, and it had won. Life at the cabin slowly returned to its rhythm. Mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons stacking firewood, evenings watching the lake shimmer under the fading light. But there was a difference now, a sense of peace sharper because it had been earned. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved, stopped to chat, even invited me to barbecues. The lake community felt less like a battlefield and more like a home, and though Karen still lurked somewhere out there, plotting, her voice no longer carried weight. She had become a cautionary tale, a punchline whispered with a shake of the head, a reminder of what happens when arrogance collides with truth. One evening as I sat by the fire pit, beer in hand, I thought about how absurd it all had been. The fraudulent listing, the padlock, the open house circus, the courtroom showdown. It had felt high stakes at times, dramatic and exhausting, but looking back it was almost comical, a saga so ridiculous that it could only end the way it had, with Karen shouting into the void while the rest of us laughed. Power, I realized, is only as strong as the people who believe in it, and once the belief crumbles, so does the empire. She had ruled with fear, but laughter had undone her, and in the end, that was the sweetest victory of all.